Hi, I'm BECMI Berserker and welcome back to my channel and to yet another exploration of a BECMI adventure module. This time we're diving into a classic basic level adventure that has remained popular since its release all the way back in 1983, due to its mix of outdoor encounters and heavy dungeon crawls, as well as an infamous encounter with a red dragon. I'm speaking of course about B5 Horror on the Hill, written by Douglas Niles. Horror on the Hill was an adventure module aimed at character levels 1 to 3, and has the average number of pages for a BECMI adventure module, being 32 pages in length. The cover art was by Roslof, offering some foreshadowing of what was to greet the players inside. The cover itself was made up of 3 panels, consisting of maps detailing a location the players will come to know as the Hill, and a place known as the ruined Monastery. The reverse of one of the panels contained pre-rolled character information for players who didn't have existing characters. These would be called pre-gens today. As with many BECMI adventure modules, this cover could double as a Dungeon Master screen, so that the players could not see what was hidden behind it. Being a basic level adventure, the expectation of players back in 1983 was that the scenario was going to be situated in a dungeon, but Roslof's artwork clearly demonstrated adventuring above the surface, which was an exciting prospect and offered the potential for this module to take advantage of wilderness rules found in the Blue Box Expert set, also released the same year. What wasn't taken advantage of was the potential to place this adventure within the known world campaign setting, also included within the expert rules, which were carried forward from the 1981 edition, so it's not like the author would have been unaware of the opportunity. That said, perhaps it was a conscious decision to keep the location campaign agnostic, despite there being earlier adventure releases more obviously linked to the known world campaign setting, with suggested locations being offered in the 1983 expert rules release. If you have any insight into the decision making around this, why not drop a comment below? It would be fascinating to learn. My first impressions of Horror on the Hill whilst flicking through its pages, even after so many years, is how much it doesn't conform to the standard module layout of the day, due to the branding for Dungeons & Dragons going through some flux because of the whole BX to BECMI change. You can see the differences between the cover presentations quite clearly here, where B1 to B4 on the right all share the same look and feel, whilst B5, Horror on the Hill, demonstrates the rebranded look, taking advantage of the opportunity to place the name of the game you are playing front and centre of the product. I mean, when you think about it, it's quite incredible how the earlier modules did not even have Dungeons & Dragons emblazoned across their front covers, so that customers could discern what they were looking at. Sure, it's tucked away in these bits, but once you see its lack of marketing presence, you can't unsee it. The move to the rebranded look also demonstrated that TSR, as a company that for the most part was run by gamers, was learning marketing and branding concepts on the go. As for the look and feel of the rest of the module, the interior artwork by Holloway was dark and broody, being heavily inked, but I think the art also demonstrates a fair bit of restraint in its portrayal of characters, erring on the side of grim figures of non-heroic proportions going about their work, rather than trying to convince us of any great power these characters have. Even the way Holloway dresses the characters has a far more realistic edge than perhaps what might be thought of as heroic fantasy in later years. I like my fantasy as close to gritty realism as possible, so Holloway's illustrations really resonate with my own vision of D&D. So after that bit of preamble, let's get into this module. The first thing Horror on the Hill presents to the reader is a preface, a quick rundown of what this adventure is about and some insight into what the characters will face. The plot is, as usual, relatively simple. The adventurers have gathered at an outpost called Guido's Fort, which borders an untamed wilderness. Not far from Guido's Fort, across a river that is 1 mile in width, is a menacing place referred to only as the Hill, which is often shrouded in view by what seem to be gouts of steam or smoke that rise from outlets in the hill's surface. The Hill is rumoured to contain many monsters that threaten civilization, and many adventurers have travelled there to seek out this threat and deal with it, but none have returned. When has this ever put off a bunch of aspiring adventurers? So the player characters meet in the Lion's Den Inn at Guido's Fort and plan their journey to the Hill because, of course, they'll be the ones who will return. Won't they? So a classic meet in a tavern and go dungeoneering kind of plot then. But what's so great about that? Well, nothing at this point, and I think that's part of this module's charm. What the players don't know at the start is that the threat of attack is by a force of goblins and hobgoblins, but dealing with these creatures is actually just the first half of this adventure. The characters will find themselves plunged, literally, into the lower levels of the hill, having to fend off more difficult foes whilst trying to find their way back to the surface, and Guido's Fort. Clearly, Horror on the Hill offers some interesting twists and turns that subvert the initial understanding of the adventure, and it is that, in my opinion, which can make this a memorable scenario, not to mention how generous it is when it comes to treasure and magical items, which I'll demonstrate towards the end of this video, so please look out for that. Referring to the contents page, we can see that the module is split into 8 separate sections, and I think it's worth walking you through each of these briefly so that you get a better idea of what Horror on the Hill contained and how it knitted together. The first part is called Beginning the Adventure, and whilst one might dismiss this chapter as a bit of fluffy preamble, there is some interesting stuff here, most notably a table of random rumours that the party may learn about the hill during their stay at Guido's fort before they embark on their quest. In addition, the DM is alerted to the need for the party to consider their transport to and from the hill. Remember, a mile-wide river separates the hill from Guido's fort. How will the party get across? Hire a ferryman? What about if they need to get back? When should the ferryman arrive? Or should the party just purchase a boat, but risk getting it lost or stolen, leaving them stuck on the hill? Logistics like this end up being a lot more fun than they might seem on the surface, with player disagreements emerging through character roleplay. Once the players have settled on a plan for getting to and from the hill, they are ready for the Surface of the Hill chapter, which gives the party their first clues of what enemies they may be facing, and also offers the potential to enter into a bargaining agreement with a couple of witches. The Ruined Monastery chapter is the real gateway to the rest of the scenario, as it becomes clear that the goblin and hobgoblin threat to Guido's fort reside within what was clearly a retreat for an evil deity. What the party soon learn upon exploring the place, assuming they remain alive, is that there is a dungeon below the monastery. As they work their way through it, defeating enemies, they will eventually come face to face with the Hobgoblin King. Upon defeating him in his throne room, there is no reason for the party to think that the adventure is not over. However, a sneaky trap sends them into dungeon level 2, and without the means to get back up, the only way to Guido's fort is forward, through caverns of classic dungeon denizens and, I'm happy to say, a group of berserkers. Pushing through these warrens of caves should eventually lead the party to dungeon level 3, which offers them an exit to the surface, but only by crossing paths with an evil red dragon. If the dragon is dealt with, the party should find their way back to the surface and Guido's fort unopposed. The Tying Up Loose Ends chapter refers the DM back to the arrangements the party made, or didn't make, for returning across the river, and once safe at the Lion's Den, there may still be a witch's bargain to contend with. Finally, there is the New Monsters chapter, which details 3 new creatures that live on the hill, and I'll touch on these towards the end of the video. We've already discussed elements of the Beginning the Adventure chapter, so let's jump straight into the Surface of the Hill. To do this, I'll get the inside cover back on the screen for you. Let's zoom in specifically on the hill map, like so. Obviously, the contrasting is not great here, a common complaint with these older publications when looking back at them, but I'll try to make things obvious as we go along. The first thing to note is what's absent, and that's Guido's fort. In fact, there's no reference to it here at all. We are told in the Beginning the Adventure chapter that the hill sits across the River Shrill from it. So it's reasonable to assume the characters will be arriving from the east, here, and that they have a choice of 2 landing stages, here and here. As written, both these landings are unopposed, but I guess if the party keep returning to Guido's fort for supplies, then you could have goblins and hobgoblins secure these landings to make life difficult for the adventurers. We're going to assume that isn't the case for now, and I'm going to leave the Guido's fort label on the right of the screen, just for context as I continue. Now, whilst this part of the adventure certainly happens outside of a dungeon, the area of play is more or less set out like one. First, I should point out the scale here for each square being 300 feet, so this area is not insignificant. You will notice that these are trails, so expected pathways the adventurers will take. We are informed that the bushes either side of the trails are possible to traverse, but a nuisance to push through, requiring 2 turns or 20 minutes of rest for each cross-country square moved. So clearly, the characters are disincentivized from travelling this way. We're also shown these, which are cliffs, with each having a height marker next to them. We are told that only a thief may attempt to scale these cliffs. For those of you unfamiliar with old school gaming, only a thief had the ability to, as it was put, climb sheer surfaces, which loosely translated to climb difficult things to climb. It was one of the features that made the class attractive. What all this means is that movement on the hill is controlled and mostly contained to the trails and clearings, which effectively act as outdoor corridors and rooms, making this, for all intents and purposes, an external dungeon crawl. That said, the wilderness rules in the expert set can still be useful, especially when considering things like range and movement, which become measured in yards rather than feet when outdoors. Whilst the characters are expected to move through the hill's environment much like a dungeon, the DM should still remain aware of what the characters might see and hear at any one time. For instance, this cliff is 80 feet in height, but this one here is 240 feet, and this one at the peak of the hill is 320 feet. So anyone making it to this point would have a great view of the surrounding area, effectively looking over the walls of the dungeon where line of sight allows. To enable me to talk a little bit more effectively about what's on the hill, let me just show you what's in each of these areas. The ruined monastery leading to the dungeon levels is near the top left. Pause the video if you want to examine this a bit more closely before continuing. One thing I should draw your attention to is the number of unremarkable locations that are here. There are 5 in fact. What do I mean by unremarkable? Well, these 5 locations all have a boxed entry within the module text, but then no additional information for the Dungeon Master to work with. I mean, the descriptive text for the locations is nice, but there is a sense of so what when you read them. Now I know that mundane spaces do exist, and maybe this is just an acknowledgement of that, but even if there was some text offered under these boxes to suggest an increased chance of a wandering monster in these areas, at least they would feel more meaningful. That said, they could be useful places for rest and recuperation, but 5 out of 19 locations without any further descriptive text is a minor negative in my opinion. That said, we do get potential for more discovery at these 5 cave areas, which are each supported by a mini-map for detailed exploration, offering the characters a choice of whether to enter their dark depths or continue their expedition around the hill. I really like this. Adventuring in one environment can go a bit stale without anyone noticing, but as soon as you introduce a mix of wilderness and dungeon encounters, the dynamic stays fresh and interesting. There are a few other locations here that I should cover before we move into the monastery. The first is the Mysterious Cottage. This is home to a pair of old crones called Rosabella, a 5th level cleric, and Rosalinda, a 6th level magic user. These are the so-called witches I referred to earlier. This is actually an interesting encounter if the characters don't attack them. You see, these ladies are always looking for a bargain, and they have a certain amount of leverage in this hostile environment. They can offer healing and other support, but only in exchange for coin, or sometimes the head of a nearby creature, which could cost you more in hit points. There's a great opportunity for the DM to dangle a significantly sized carrot in front of the party to get them to accept support, but they do need to be careful to uphold their end of the bargain. The Tying Up Loose Ends chapter at the end of the module details the necessity to make good on these arrangements, or things can turn ugly, so caution is advised. Another important location is this one here, the Dragon Escape Tunnel. Now, we're told there is no way for this to be discovered at this point of the adventure, and I would advise this remains the case. The escape tunnel is actually where the party will emerge from if they have defeated the Red Dragon on level 3 of the dungeon, but it's worth noting its location now just to join up the dots for when that comes, even though there's no need to make use of it at this point. A further important location is this one, the Hobgoblin Camp. Assuming no goblin-type wandering monsters have already been met, this should be the first indication of the main threat to Guido's fort. We are told if the hobgoblins fail their morale check, they will flee towards the ruined monastery, giving the party some clue in respect of where more of these creatures might be found. The contents of the camp don't have any specific documented plans to evidence the hobgoblins' intentions, so any speculation by the players at this point is only that, but there's opportunity here to capture one of the enemy and question them. How cooperative they might be is up to the DM, but you can see how this can get interesting as the party gather intelligence about what's ahead. Finally, there is the ruined monastery here. This has a chapter all to itself which I'll get to next, as it is the location of the next progression of this module. As you can see, it's tucked away with only one trail leading to its nearby clearing, so it's quite possible it takes the party a significant amount of time to find it, unless they've been able to interrogate or track the hobgoblins mentioned earlier, that is. Before we enter the ruined monastery, let me just get on the screen the lists of potential enemies or encounters for you to see. Still a challenge, but certainly doable. There's also a fair bit of access to healing here, due to killer bee honey and magical berries, which could reduce the need to return to Guido's fort for rest and recuperation. Okay, so we've looked at the surface of the hill. Let's assume the characters have made it to the ruined monastery and have a look at that. The first thing to mention about this place is its scale. Each square equals 20 feet, so this is quite a big area to explore. As this is a ruin, access can be gained from numerous points in its broken wall. I've highlighted these as the obvious ones, but the wall is in such bad condition that entry could be made from almost anywhere. The main features of the ruined monastery are these. The bulk of exploration will take place within the temple complex and monastic buildings, but it's worth just covering off what else we see here for completeness sake. First there's the old garrison building, which is empty and not used by the goblins. Then there is this intriguing spot, a natural steam vent, which has a 5% chance per turn, so that's every 10 minutes, to erupt. This can cause 1d6 damage to those nearby, but only lasts a small number of rounds. This, combined with an extremely large geothermic pool nearby, should indicate to the players that there's a lot more going on under the hill than previously thought, offering some foreshadowing that they might be coming across more than just goblins and hobgoblins during their expedition. The bathhouse next to the pool is a crumbling ruin, but is home to some creepy-crawly giant centipedes if the adventurers go exploring its walls. The old tomb here houses the ancient monks who used to call this monastery home. Unsurprisingly, there is undead here to contend with, but they are only skeletons and shouldn't offer too much of a problem, especially if the party have brought a cleric along. What I'd like to draw your attention to is these small individually labelled tombs surrounding the entry hall. We are told of a treasure behind one of them, but we are not offered any information about the rest. I find this slightly odd given the tombs are keyed, which would suggest a reference in the text, but as it is, there isn't any apart from the one I just mentioned. It would have been nice to see some kind of list accompany this room description that related to these letters, and I wonder if that was the original intent when the map illustration was commissioned. As it is, I feel compelled to have to fill these spaces myself. One could say that they're just empty except for an old corpse, but there's 12 spaces here, and plenty of scope to add a more dangerous undead, such as a wight, with a justifiable amount of treasure alongside them to make the encounter worthwhile. What do you think though? It would be great to learn your experience of running this part of the module. Over in the top left of the map here is what's referred to as a tangled garden, which is essentially a mass of brambles that cover a hidden force of 9 goblins. We're told that these goblins only attack if the party attempt to look like they're heading into the temple entrance, which is this area here, which is a bit strange if I'm honest, given that the room contains little of interest, and its secret doors lead to areas more easily accessible from elsewhere. Therefore this location has no strategic value. Also, none of the goblins are armed with ranged weapons, meaning they can't take advantage of the obvious space there is in this area to try and pick characters off. I think I'd change this encounter entirely and position the goblins on the roof of the temple and monastic buildings, from which they could more easily spy approaching enemies, attack from cover, and move without being seen. This would be a real nuisance for the players, especially when you consider the maximum range of a goblin shortbow. I think this would make for much more of an exciting and memorable encounter, as the characters try to gain entry through any of the external doors under threat of hostile fire. But what do you think? Once entry is gained, we're into dungeon crawl mode, but there's several locations I want to highlight as of specific interest. The first is this external garden, which contains a magical fountain. In my opinion, this fountain is the epitome of old school gaming Jeopardy. One drink from the fountain bestows a permanent effect, as shown in this list, apart from the paralysis effect at number 3. And no further drinks have any effect at all. So once you succumb to an effect, there's no going back. So basically, the players are invited to gamble on the character's fortunes, but must accept the result. If you look at this list, the odds on getting a favourable result are actually quite good, being over 60%, and the odds of something permanently bad happening is just 25%. The second location I want to highlight is this room here, referred to as a hobgoblin supply room. This is in fact an armoury, but the number of weapons and supplies here are quite extensive. The DM is informed in the text that this is to supply the planned assault on Guido's fort, but the DM is also informed to judge the decision making of the characters entering this room. If they do nothing, then there's no reward. However, if the party put it together that the supplies are to support the planned assault and then decide to destroy the weapons, they may obtain 200 experience points as a bonus for damaging the hobgoblin clans. The DM is advised to not prompt the players in this respect, so that this experience point award is fully deserved. When you consider that the number of experience points awarded for defeating a goblin is just 5, and you get 15 for defeating a single hobgoblin, then 200 XP is really very significant, highlighting a distinction between old school gaming and post 3rd edition versions of Dungeons & Dragons, where using your head is rewarded much more than using your sword. All this sounds great, but I do have an opinion on it that I'll come to when we discuss a similar room in Dungeon Level 1. There's little more of significance within this complex apart from this third location, which is the Dungeon Access Room. Gaining access to this enables the game to progress towards the encounter with the Hobgoblin King. The door is locked, but its key is found on a hobgoblin that must be defeated in the adjacent room. Overall, the Ruined Monastery chapter can be rather mundane if run as written, but it has the potential to be quite exciting with roof-positioned goblins and more interesting content within the old tomb. If you want to be particularly evil, you could even add something devious to the geothermal pool, which is a bit of a non-event without something in it. Otherwise, let me put on this map the list of enemies and encounters found here. In addition, there is also plenty of magical treasure to be found here, which is a recurrent theme as the module progresses. I'm doing a tally as I go along, which I'll share with you at the end, which I think you'll find interesting. Anyway, time to leave the Ruined Monastery behind as we sally forth into Dungeon Level 1 and the stronghold of the Hobgoblin King. Let's get that map on the screen. Access to the dungeon from the monastery is from here in the top right. The scale here is 10 foot per square, and the area is full of potential enemies, but again, I'll just be focusing on several aspects of interest. First, there is an interesting callback to the evil monks that used to live in the monastery, as one of their faithful still lives here, administering spiritual guidance to the goblins. This third level cleric, named Moray Vako, can be a difficult opponent, especially given the magical items he possesses. Second, we have another supply room, this time containing food and logistical tools like rope, iron spikes, backpacks and wooden poles. Again, the DM is encouraged to award XP if the players destroy this stuff to impede the assault on Guido's fort, but this time it's worth up to 400 XP. So that's a total of 600 XP potentially gained for just destroying equipment, if you include the room in the monastery. But if you think about it, this is also storyline XP, and possibly one of the earliest examples of it, where the party are rewarded for doing what they came here to do, which is protect Guido's fort, rather than just go on a treasure hunting mission. However, although this sabotage of equipment can seem sensible, I think there could be another side to this. I mean, if the party end up defeating the hobgoblins, then the equipment in the supply rooms could be of real benefit if donated to Guido's fort. So perhaps a greater number of XP could be given for commandeering and donating these supplies on return to the fort. Obviously they are worth more in working order, and I'm not sure those in charge of Guido's fort would be happy that such supplies were destroyed when they could so easily be transported back once the hill had been secured, which would be the case if the characters remained alive. I think I'd award up to 1000 XP total if the players took this approach, as they would be sacrificing loot for the good of securing the fort's defence, which is the entire objective I think. But if you have another opinion, let me know in the comments. A further location to discuss is this one here, referred to as a battle room. This just means that there was a battle here between an NPC party and the goblins, in which the NPC party came off worse and lie mutilated across the floor. What I wanted to point out was this bit of text referring to an invisible dead magic user who can't be seen due to still wearing his Ring of Protection. This is obviously an error, which should be corrected and be a Ring of Invisibility, or if you're feeling generous, you could have him wearing both. It's a small thing, but it was a little confusing when reading this, so I thought I should mention it in case you also come across it. The Hall of the Hobgoblin King is this chamber here, where the king sits on his throne. These hobgoblins are quite powerful, with some armed with magical weapons, so things could get a bit delicate here, but a well-placed sleep spell could deplete the number significantly, leaving just the king and bodyguards to deal with. There's a nice bit of treasure in the adjoining rooms, and the party may well want to stuff their pockets before heading back to Guido's fort, feeling victorious. But that's where things just go awry. Unbeknownst to the party is this pit trap that becomes active should the Hobgoblin King not be sitting on his throne, and the weight of 4 characters passes over it, so the king's throne is effectively a switch. This weight is a bit ambiguous, but we should just go along with it. I think if you have a party of 3, just go with 3. I'm sure the goblins have an arrangement that they only traverse the area 2 at a time or something, just in case the king has got the trots or something. Once the trapdoors open, the characters are sent down a 300-foot chute to level 2. It's at this point that the objective of the adventure takes a turn, and becomes a bit of a self-rescue mission. Guido's fort might be safe for now, but the party certainly isn't. Climbing back up the chute is not possible, not even for a thief, and only a fly or levitate spell can help. Fly is probably not available to the party at this point, but it's entirely possible that levitate is, so there is potential for a magic user or elf to return to level 1 of the dungeon back up the chute, but they would probably be alone. In my opinion, I think it's most likely the party would press on and consider levitating back up to seek rope from the storeroom, only if things got too bad on level 2. Before we explore level 2, let's have a look at the distribution of enemies here on level 1 to get some context of what the party would have been up against. As you can see, there's considerable force here and plenty of potential for things to go wrong. If the party withdrew at any point, the DM would be more than justified in securing the area in preparation for another assault. I could foresee a party returning to Guido's fort to launch a preemptive strike, and this dungeon level becoming a bit of a battleground. It's all up for grabs, which makes this scenario incredibly exciting and fluid. There's a couple more things that I neglected to point out that I'm reminded of when looking at this. First is the potential to gain allies through freeing a couple of prisoners, a second level thief called Cullen de Filch, and a second level dwarf named Gareth Ironhand. Additionally, there is the potential to gain a couple of friendly wolves who will act as attack dogs and fight for you on command. All the party need to do is feed them, and they become faithful companions that enjoy chewing on their goblin ex-masters. Great fun. Right, so let's leave dungeon level 1 and wind our way through the labyrinth that is dungeon level 2. The first thing you'll notice when looking at this map, which is also at a scale of 10 foot per square, is how confusing it is. That's deliberate. The main feature of this level is its labyrinthian quality. The party are deposited by the chute from level 1 and fall through the ceiling into this octagon-shaped room here. This level is supposed to be difficult to navigate, and the DM is advised to describe the directions in a vague way, such as how a tunnel bends round, rather than any reference to cardinal directions that might enable players to get their bearings. It is entirely possible for a party to get lucky and reach the underground river exit to level 3 incredibly quickly by taking the south door from the octagon room and then the southeast door from the second octagon room, but this would be rare, and there's a gelatinous cube here to contend with on the way. Both these octagon rooms seem identical, and even the doors look identical also. This is so that the party get confused when entering and re-entering these rooms. Of course, one way to deal with this is to mark the doors, and I think players will come up with that suggestion rather quickly. But navigating this dungeon does call back to me the importance of some of the more mundane equipment adventurers should carry, like a stick of chalk to make visual breadcrumbs of the tunnels already walked. There's not too much intrigue when it comes to this level, but before I show you the list of potential encounters, it is worth mentioning that once the party have been deposited in the centre room, they are soon attacked by a couple of crazed humans who have been alerted to the noise. These are in fact berserkers. Yay! They are actually part of a group of men who got lost and stuck down here and have now gone completely mad. In fact, the rest of them reside in this corner of the labyrinth, where one of them has proclaimed himself King Derrywinky III. Encountering Derrywinky peacefully can result in some comical roleplay, as Derrywinky speaks to the party in a demeaning and pithy way. The module suggests any reluctance to kneel before Derrywinky is met with immediate violence, but I would draw this encounter out a bit more, purely for the comical element, as I envision Derrywinky in very much the same way as Michael Palin's Pontius Pilate in The Life of Brian. You could even get the party asking if the berserkers would like to be fweed. Of course, they are berserkers, so would be short-tempered, but giving this encounter a bit more space to breathe can be a lot of fun. As mentioned earlier, the exit to level 3 is here at this underground river, which is easily forded, being just 2 feet deep in some places, but the current will only allow downstream travel. Before we see what's there, let's get that list of encounters up, which includes ghouls, bugbears, and even an owlbear. So not too difficult in my opinion. I think the most intriguing encounter here, apart from King Derrywinky III, is this one with the Sturges, which is only accessible via one of these 3 secret doors. Apparently they've been living off rats all these years, but anyway, there's a nice reward for the players in dealing with this room, as location 75 here has quite a significant treasure hoard hidden within it. What isn't given is who put it here, as this cave system has no obvious owner, so an imaginative DM could come up with some history if they want to. I mean, someone had to make these secret doors, right? I have ideas of an old treasure map being found in a future adventure that leads to this, which begs the question, whose map was it, and do they have more stuff? Okay, so that's dungeon level 2. The party have pushed on through the labyrinth and made their way to the underground river. They leave level 2 behind and head towards level 3, towards where we know there is a red dragon lying in wait. The first thing that stood out to me here was the flow of the river, which seems to go in the opposite direction to what was shown on level 2. Although it may be obvious to some, it's worth mentioning that this could be some kind of gooseneck phenomenon, demonstrating the twists and turns the river makes through the caves. So the flow shown on level 3 is correct in my view, and the party will enter level 3 here. What's key to mention at this point is that we're told level 3 is a completely natural volcanic formation. I will certainly play up the rising temperature as the party navigate this area. Although it doesn't become threatening to the characters, the players don't know that, so it's always worth keeping their anxiety high. What greets the party at their arrival point is a group of kobolds, and they quickly learn that these tunnels are infested with them and ruled over by a kobold chieftain. What isn't mentioned, as far as I could tell, is any relationship with the dragon. Do the kobolds worship it? Do the kobolds communicate with it? Do the kobolds live here to benefit from its protection, if only by proximity rather than any agreement with the worm? None of these questions have answers, so there are plenty of gaps to fill for imaginative DMs. Personally, I'd have the kobolds as dragon worshippers. I know this is before Wizards of the Coast turned kobolds into a draconic race, but I think it still feeds into their cowardly lifestyle and wanting to side with the biggest kid in the playground, as long as they're safe and left alone. If I wanted to develop this relationship further, I might want to send kobolds out nightly to Guido's fort for the odd bit of human flesh for their red dragon overlord, which could end up giving this entire adventure a different edge, and also have there being a point to these kobolds and the red dragon being found in close proximity to each other. However you want to run things, the characters are expected to defeat the kobolds, of which there are 33 in total. That said, there is an intriguing combat location here at 87, as this 300 feet deep chasm contains a river of molten lava that may only be spanned by the bridges A, B and C, which I've assumed to be rock bridges, as they're not described as otherwise. This can turn into a bit of a pitched battle, as the kobolds blow a horn for reinforcements. What's particularly nasty about this encounter is this bit of text here, which states that any character wounded whilst on a bridge must roll their dexterity score or below to keep their balance. Otherwise they fall into the chasm, into the lava, which is basically certain death. Now, what isn't stated is the width of these bridges, so there's potential here for the players to become upset if they must make a dexterity check to fall over, when this is never done in any other combat location. Therefore, I think it's incumbent on the DM to describe these bridges as extremely narrow and precarious. I think I would foreshadow the danger further by stating the characters get a -2 to attack from the position, even with missile weapons, due to sure footing being required, and also they'd experience a loss of dexterity bonus to armor class due to poor maneuverability, compounding that with, you really don't want to get hit on that bridge, as it could mean bad things. The obvious thing for the kobolds to do is block the exits of the bridge and keep the characters in that precarious position, so winning the southern end of this cavern is a major part of assuring victory here. That said, astute and patient players may want to seek a way around, which can be attempted through the eastern passages, although these have perils of their own. Once the kobolds have been dealt with, the party may continue to try to find their way out of the hill, but the exit is blocked by the final encounter of this dungeon, a red dragon. Now, a red dragon is no laughing matter for a party that may be 3rd level at the most. What's key to note here is that the red dragon has just 7 hit dice, while the monster description of the creature in the basic red box states that they should have 10. So obviously it's been scaled down here, affecting its saving throws also. Furthermore, as you can see, its hit points are just at 22, which is extremely low, given that a 7 hit dice creature could have a maximum of 56. This is clearly to limit the power of the dragon's breath weapon. If you didn't know already, in BECMI the damage made by a dragon's breath weapon is equal to its current hit points, which may be saved against for half. But still, if this dragon is alert and wins their initiative, they could drop a 22 hit point breath weapon against a 3rd level party, gathered in a cone 30 feet wide at the end. This could be devastating. Now, why did I say if this dragon is alert? Well, in BECMI and old school Dungeons & Dragons, on encountering a dragon, there is a percentage chance that it might be asleep. This calls back to the roots of D&D being in classic literature, the most obvious example being in The Hobbit, when Bilbo Baggins creeps up on Smaug whilst he sleeps on his pile of treasure. Red dragons have a 10% chance to be sleeping when encountered, so there is a slight chance this dragon might be caught unawares. There is always the smart player who might say, well, we'll just wait till he's asleep. But I usually counter this with the fact that dragons don't have the same circadian rhythms as other creatures, so they could be waiting a long time. One more thing to point out about this dragon is that it's a spellcaster. That wasn't always a given in BECMI, and was only possible if the dragon could speak a language, for which there was another percentage chance, as shown here. Obviously, this one does, so there might even be the potential to enter into negotiations with it to buy passage to the surface. But don't forget, red dragons are terribly evil. They'd likely give you assurances that you may pass, but then burn you to a crisp just for the lols. One notable absence to this encounter is any name the dragon may possess. I think that's quite an oversight. I know it's not as if the players would learn it, but in my opinion it would round off the creature, and if it had to escape, then its name might be useful for recurring encounters. As it is, the DM may just name the creature themselves if they wish. However this encounter goes, it can be fraught with many twists and turns. Remember, you're extremely crunchy in BECMI, so it's unlikely that you take any risks here, especially if you're currently laden with treasure. Speaking of which, that red dragon might just see you as the mountain coming to Muhammad, which could put any such party on the back foot if negotiating a way to the surface. Ooh, this could get quite devious, couldn't it? Especially as the party can also spy quite clearly the dragon's own mountain of gold and goodies. It could be a case of who goes for their gun first. Talking of the surface, it's reached through this escape tunnel here, which returns the party to the surface of the hill. I'll demonstrate that in a moment, but first let me do what I've been doing so far and show all the encounters on this level of the map, of which there are only a couple more than just the kobolds. So although most of the creatures, apart from the dragon, are not too much of a threat, it's the environment that offers them the advantage over the characters. Right, let's climb that escape tunnel, which we're told is a gradual ascent for about 1 mile, before it reaches here on the surface of the hill. Obviously there is still the descent from here to contend with, as well as any encounters not faced previously, but I think the party should be allowed to reach either of these clearings unopposed. And so we find ourselves at the end of the adventure, and tying up loose ends. Assuming the party have thought of a good enough plan to get back to Guido's fort, then they should be allowed to do so. The module even considers the possibility that the party subdued the red dragon, which means they caused it to surrender by besting it in combat, and it now serves them, even if begrudgingly. Subdued dragons are always looking for a means of escape, so it could be it just flies off once safely at the surface, but you could also have it get them across the river somehow. It's entirely up to you. As mentioned earlier, this part of the scenario will require the party to make good on any bargains they made with Rosabella and Rosalinda, who will visit Guido's fort to make their demands more obvious. It's advisable the party uphold their end of any bargains made. And that's it, apart from a couple of pages to cover off the new monsters introduced in this module, specifically the piranha bird, which attacks as a swarm of 1-foot-long carnivorous hummingbirds. Ouch. The steam weevil, which also attacks as a swarm, but these are heat-loving insects, and the lava lizard, a creature that attacks with a burning bite. All great additions to the BECMI monster portfolio. Otherwise, there you have it, Horror on the Hill by Douglas Niles. So what are my thoughts? Well, I have to say I think this is a great module. Sure, there are a few things I would do differently, such as I described with goblins positioning themselves on the roof of the ruined monastery, or dragon-worshipping kobolds, but there's only so much that can be contained in a 32-page module, and even then, the writer has made excellent use of the page count available. However you want to run the scenario, the stage is set, and all the DM has to do is move the pieces on the board to give things a bit of a twist here and there. Interspersed throughout are the wonderful illustrations by Jim Holloway, which lend the module a particular tone that feels like fantasy while still making it seem dangerous. And aside from the actual plot and storyline, which I actually think works really well, this is an extraordinarily generous module in respect of wealth and magical items that can be found within the hill. I've listed it all here for you, but essentially there's around 35,000 gold pieces worth of coins, gems, art and jewellery that may be found, if you were to include the randomised coins found on dead hobgoblins, etc. In addition, there's 6 scrolls of cure light wounds and 11 potions of healing in this magical item list, so staying alive is certainly achievable in this adventure. What's really interesting is that there are 5 potions of invisibility, an elven cloak and also a ring of invisibility available in this game, so the ability to be stealthy is a viable option in completing the mission. Overall, a party should easily be able to achieve the next level of experience on their return to Guido's fort. What I've learned in doing this video is that I haven't run this scenario anything like the number of times I should, so I think I'm going to change that. I really hope you enjoyed this basic level BECMI adventure review. What's been your experience of Horror on the Hill? Did it go to plan? Did you change things? Did the hobgoblins end up assaulting Guido's fort? Or did the dragon learn that adventurers taste like chicken? It would be great to know. Otherwise, please give this video a like if you did indeed like it, and please hit the subscribe button if I've earned your future attention. If you'd like to thank me further, you can buy me a coffee, link on the screen or in the description. I'm BECMI Berserker. Keep making your saving throws, and I hope to see you back here soon.